I'm Ashley.
And I'm Chris, and this is Business by the Books.
Welcome to the Business by the Books podcast, where we believe that leaders are readers. So if you're not reading, you are not leading. This is episode 6, and today's book you have talked a lot about. This is kind of your job.
It is. That's what I get paid to do.
Yes, and it is Getting Started in Consulting by Alan Weiss. Dr. Alan Weiss, I should say, is a PhD. And it was written in 2000, and you read this in 2001.
Right, so it was kind of hot off the press.
Yeah. Anna wasn't born, and I was 3.
Yeah.
So, wow.
Yeah, I think I finished it in January, so you're probably like a little over 2, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So. Sweet. All right. Well, do you want to introduce us to this book?
Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about what consulting is. I read recently a consultant is someone who solves problems, somebody else's problems, and he's figure out how to get paid to do it.
Ooh.
Okay, or it could be she.
Yeah.
And so I actually read this book when I had just started the first consulting company that I did back in 2000. And so, you know, being a consultant is difficult because you have to, you're solving people's problems. So you have to get to know them, you have to understand their problem. And so being relatively new to it, and certainly having my own company, you know, as we've talked about through this whole series, I was a reader, and this was an opportunity. So I actually bought this book in Savannah, Georgia. And so when we were out of town and spent some time in the hotel room getting started on it. But it really provided a lot of insights for me on what are some things I could do to be successful as a consultant. Awesome. So that's kind of laying the groundwork for this. One of the things that you and I talked about this afternoon is not everyone is a consultant. Yeah. I mean, if you look at all the people who work, but I think everyone should have a consultant's mindset. So even if you work, like here in Houston, you work for a big oil company or you work for a manufacturer, you have to sell ideas, and essentially that's what consultants do.
Yeah. So within the context of the book, how is it kind of broken up? How does it break down this big overarching idea of consulting? Yeah,
so kind of the first thing that Alan does is he kind of gives you a framework of what is a consultant. And so what are some things that he does, and he gives an example. And what was really neat about him was he started at a consulting company, and within a relatively short period of time, I mean, he had a 7-figure income. Wow, yeah. So he kind of opens up with that. So instantly he has some credibility that he knows how to do this. And so that's kind of the first thing. And then he talks about, just some principles, like he always kind of worked by himself. Now, I haven't done that. And, in ADV, I really want to grow it to a large organization. He also talked about marketing, and that's one of the things I really want to spend some time talking about. And marketing is, how do you build your business? Yeah. And he also talked about pricing. So there's lots of little tidbits. It's also funny to go back, and I reread it when I started ADV, I guess back in 2017. And it's funny because he talks about technology, and he said, you might think about getting email, not everybody, but can you imagine today?
If you don't have an email, that's a problem.
And matter of fact, I remember on that trip calling your mother and talking to her. And back in those days, you had to pay for roaming charges. I talked to her for like an hour, and that one call was like $150. Oh my. Yeah, so that just gives you some context, the difference, going back 20 years ago, how much things have changed. Wow. So in some regards, being a consultant, I'm not sure it's necessarily easy, but because of technology relative to what Alan was dealing with, we have some real advantages today.
Yeah, well, and I think that whole concept of him saying, get an email, do whatever, it's this idea of making sure you're on top of whatever's going to set you apart and allow you to do your job really well.
You need to use the best technology that's available that you can afford.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because, so anyway, I think it's a great book. It was fun for me to reread it before kind of getting ADV going, because he had some really good principles that, obviously we'll talk about during this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So going into that, what really stood out to you? What was your favorite part about the book?
Well, I think my favorite part, and I'm kind of looking at some of my notes here, he discusses kind of the startup phase and kind of fundamental marketing. And one of the things that's really been fun for me in going back and rereading these books, so I think I'm halfway through the 50 that we're going to do, is what's been a lot of fun is to realize that a lot of these things I read even 20 years ago, they're part of who I am, which is the whole point of reading, is that if every book that you read, you pull out a couple of little nuggets.
Yep.
So one of the things I realized that I really got out of this book is as a consultant, you always need to be marketing. And it's not something that you start and you stop. And so what happened for me, I mean, matter of fact, this week was a great week. We got 3 new projects, and I came home in a great mood today. And it's like it was a really good week. Now, not every week is like that, but I'm always thinking about, okay, how can I connect with people? And so marketing is a mindset, right? And it means that you're always looking for opportunities to expand what you're doing. And this book does a great job, helping build a framework for that.
Marketing is my love language, so I love that. That gets me excited.
Then you're majoring in that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know. I switched from management to marketing just because I love marketing so much. That's awesome. So I guess kind of transitioning from the concepts of this book and actually reading it, how have you, and you've already talked about it, but how have you seen this apply as a consultant in your own business?
So, one of the things that you've asked me to do is to have a favorite quote or chapter. So the opening salvo he has in this book. So we'll talk about both these, but the first one on page 1, he said, "You will be what you decide to be, nothing less, nothing more."
Yep.
And so in some regards, in any capacity, you've got to decide who you want to become. And you almost visualize that. It's almost like in golf, you visualize that shot. And as I said, that's something I've carried with me. So I even remember, as I kind of started ADV and even going back before I officially started it, I had started thinking about what kind of revenue I could generate. And it was amazing. I was telling your mom into last year, I mean, I was within like 3% of what I predicted where we would be in year 3.
Wow.
So it's really important in consulting and really in anything that you have an idea where you want to go before you get there. Because if you don't plan that, then you're just going to be, wandering. And what's the saying that if you fail to plan, okay, then you're never going to get where you want. You're just going to wander aimlessly.
Yeah.
So I think to me that was something that really stuck with me. And being a natural goal setting person, it was kind of a natural extension. So anyway, I think that's super important. The other thing, and we talked a lot about marketing, but on page 199, he said, "Never stop marketing. The creation of a long-term successful practice," which is what a consultant has, "is dependent on marketing, not delivery."
Ooh.
So let me ask you a question. I mean, obviously I'm doing most of the talking. So in your experience at A&M and you've taken marketing classes, how do you define marketing?
Oh man, so shout out to Dr. Lampo, my intro to marketing professor, because she really expanded my concept of what that was. Because I think when most people hear marketing, and I was in this category, I thought advertising.
Right.
I thought specifically about how do we gain customers? And I was thinking that the only way you do that is through billboards and TV commercials. It's so much more than that. And it's the holistic perspective of business, everything from price, place, advertising and all of that. So it's a holistic perspective on how you run a business from the ground up. And then you have the other parts of it, like the finance and the accounting and all of that other stuff. But the marketing really is the essence of the business itself. The story, it's the brand, it's who you are, what you're selling, and how you sell that.
So it's kind of the projection of who you are to the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And how you share that story, as well as what it is that you're actually sharing with people.
Well, and the interesting thing about marketing is it builds a framework, and one of the other books that we're going to do in this series is the one-page marketing plan. And so
I love it.
I know,
it's
I
so
do
good.
too, and that's a relatively new book that we both
awesome.
discovered. But a marketing plan lays a framework for everything, right? It's how you do the work, how you deliver the work, how you sell it. And I'll admit, for a non-business educated person, I mean, I'd say I'm a business person now, but when I was your stage, I wasn't. I lumped marketing, advertising, and sales as business stuff.
Exactly.
But each of those is fundamentally different. And if you don't distinguish them, you just kind of meld everything together, and you can't really fully leverage each of those independently.
Exactly, because they're all extremely powerful tools that if you do use them in the right way, Oh my, you can do so much, and you can really flesh out the concept of what it is to be a business owner when you actually use the tools. But I think a lot of people don't understand the tools and they don't know how to use them, and it's hard to use them. That's the thing, is if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. Depending on the industry you're in, depending on who you are, depending on what is available to you, there's so many ways to do everything. And
well,
so,
you got to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's another part too.
And it's hard. And like right now with COVID,
yeah.
And then the price of oil, there's a lot of layoffs going on in the oil and gas industry. And, I know some of the folks listening to this are in the oil and gas industry, and most of the majors are having significant layoffs.
Yeah.
So we're in the process of trying to launch this project, and we're really struggling because everybody we're talking to, they're like, this isn't a good time for us to be doing this. So I don't know where it's going to wind up. I mean, I'm always optimistic, but we're probably going to have to change some of our strategy, which is the essence of marketing. Is if what you're doing isn't working, you got to pivot and find some other way to engage with people.
Yeah, absolutely. From a college perspective, because I always like to have kind of insight into what you would recommend for college students.
Have the old guy giving some advice?
Yeah, seriously. Because I can't really give much advice to my own peers, and I don't really know what advice there is to give. But in regards to getting started in consulting, it's really interesting because when you look within the business school at Texas A&M and business schools across the country, they specifically train people in consulting. But as somebody who is actually in the consulting industry, what does that look like in regards to getting started in that process?
So, I had lunch with Dr. Fowler this week, and Dr. Fowler to me is the world's best consultant. And, I learned a lot from him, and he's also enjoyed this. But my encouragement for anybody that wants to go into consulting is go work for a while. Go work. You can go straight into consulting, which I was fortunate to do, but I worked for a company that was consulting and I learned a lot. But really to be I think to be successful, most people who go into consulting, and Alan's a good example, you do something, you work for somebody else for a while, and you learn how to meet people's needs. At the end of the day, consultants can be very well paid, so that's why people want to do it. But if you are not a servant at heart, right? So if I have a client that calls me, at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and they need me to do something, I have to work. We've experienced that. Most trips that we take on vacations, I'm always working. It's like being a doctor; you're always on call. So my advice to someone who wants to get into consulting is, for example, like in the oil and gas industry, go work for oil and gas operator for a few years, because eventually you're going to be consulting to them. Now, I think I got to that same point, right? But I worked a lot of hours and those kind of things, and we may can delve into that issue. But you've got to know something before somebody's going to pay you for something.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's the hard part.
Yeah, and as a college student, I don't know very much. So.
Well, let's camp on that for a minute. So one of the ideas, and I don't know that we've talked about it in the series, is the 3 S's. Okay, so you have substance, style, and stature, right?
Yes.
And so everybody wants stature. You come out of school and you want everybody to think you're the smartest person in the world. And you might have been smart in high school, you might have been smart in college, but when you get out and you start working with people, and this was what I experienced, my first couple of years, is I was working with people who had been doing engineering longer than I had been alive, right? And so, now I'm at that point. If I hire a young engineer, I've been doing engineering for over 25 years, and they're 23 years, so I'm now that old guy. But it's a progressive thing. So your substance is what you know. And so really the first 5 to 10 years, you just got to develop your craft. You're asked to do things independently, so you kind of accomplish things as an individual. Yeah. Then the style is how you interact with people. And you and I like talking. We really enjoy this.
We love it.
We do, and we've enjoyed this.
Yeah,
it's fun to kind of watch and see how we're engaging together. And so our style is interactive, but a lot of people aren't. I don't know, you probably know the statistics better than I do, but my guess is most people are probably have an introvert bent, okay? And so you got to figure out what your style is, and then the product of your substance, what your style, how you interact with people, that's the stature. And in some regards, people who are outgoing and like to get up in front of people, it's easier to get stature early on, right? Because the substance part, everybody's working on that, but that style is super important. So He also spends some time in this book talking about public speaking, and so we can talk on that a little bit as well.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I love public speaking.
I know you do.
I just like speaking. It doesn't need to be public. I can do private
you like
speaking.
to talk. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Well, any final thoughts on the book specifically, or any of the concepts within the book itself?
I think, Ashley, a couple things. One is, you got to figure out, and you can't figure out right when you get out of school or you start your career, but within, I'd say, the first 3 to 5 years, you need to figure out what you want to do, right? And then once you kind of do that and you figure out what your natural bent is, like it says in the Bible that plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. So my advice for anybody who's thinking about going in consulting or someone who's right out of school, spend time talking with people that do what you want to do. So, for example, if you want to be a consultant, contact somebody like me. I'll give you some insight. One of the things that he talks about a little bit, and sometimes I'll call it the dark side of consulting, is that you've got to go out and get work, right? You have to put food on the table. And that's the hardest part of a consultant, because you have to be able to do the work, but you also have to be able to go get the work. So, I know the first year and a half or so when I was doing ADV, I worked all the time because I'd get the work and then I'd come home and work on reports and write it. And so it's a lot more exhausting than it is right now when we have a whole team of people, we do things. But even as a team of consultants, you've got to be thinking about, how do I go out and get work? And if you're not a hunter and you don't like to go out and get that work, consulting's probably not a good place to be.
Yeah, door-to-door sales wasn't quite my thing. I didn't do too great at that. Oops.
Well, it's the rejection part, right?
It is. It's a lot.
I'm not sure you can read a book and even get that.
No, you can't. It's really interesting. When I was doing door-to-door sales, there were certain people who, like myself, who just were not as, it's not about being pushy, it's about really honing in on somebody's need and really addressing that and being aggressive maybe in their approach versus, and I just wasn't good at that, versus people who were so naturally bent towards that, who could spot a need, who could address it, who could address every single rejection with just total optimism and move forward. And I learned a lot from that experience. But it's a lot.
Well, let's kind of take a little rabbit trail on that as well, is the key to sales is to not feel like you're pushing something on someone, but that they have a need and you're there to help meet that need. And once you get to that point, there's no guilt, because I know some people that was like, I struggle selling stuff because I feel like, what I'm selling is not worth it. But if you've got something that's very valuable to people and you know that, and you can make that connection, that's why I love consulting. That's why I love sales, because at the end of the day, I'm just helping people out. I don't feel like I'm really selling anything. So I think consulting's extremely gratifying, because I feel like you're there. Your whole role in life is to serve other people. Yeah. And, one of the things Dr. Fowle and I were talking about is that if you don't love people, and that's not a driver for what you do, either with your staff or helping clients or just trying to better humanity, consulting can be really a struggle. It can become a drag. But if you're so focused on wanting to help people out, consulting is probably one of the best ways to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sweet. Any other final thoughts on this book besides go and get it?
Yeah, so this is kind of the last thing, and I just look at my notes, is that great consultants sell ideas and concepts. This is something every professional should master. And so I was kind of thinking about, I've been doing a lot of kind of introspective thinking lately, because it's harder right now. This is an extremely difficult time to run a business, but praise the Lord, we've got a lot of work through the rest of 2020. But you've got to think all the time, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to do this series, or I wanted to do it, and you're helping me do it.
I'm just here.
Is that when you read books, it generates ideas, and that's the whole key. And so, like these 3 new projects that we got this week, it was either an idea that I had and I approached somebody about it and said, hey, let's do this thing, and I think this thing's worth $50,000, or somebody called me and said, hey, we've got this problem. And as a matter of fact, one of them is a really neat project. I've literally wanted to do it for 10 years. And I got a phone call about 6 weeks ago, and some guys said, hey, we're having some problems. We think you got the expertise. And so literally within 5 minutes, I had laid the whole thing out. And so we spent the past 6 weeks trying to get a purchase order and all that. We got it today. But all 3 of those projects started with an idea. And so everything we do in life, somebody had to have an idea. But a consultant it's critically important that you've got new ideas. And so anyway, I think that's a good point. And Alan talks about that. But once again, it just reinforces the whole reason we're doing this series is if you're reading and you're getting new ideas, it just makes it easier to solve problems. And then after a while, what happens is you have all these ideas and you're confident in them. You think they're your own. We've laughed about that, right?
Oh, yeah.
What is that called?
Oh,
is
gosh,
it
I don't know
isn't it kleptomnesia?
Something like that. It's like some German
Yeah, so
concept.
Ashley was taking a class. Were you a freshman?
It was psychology.
Yeah. So Ashley called me one day and it's like late night. She goes, Daddy, I figured out what you've got. And I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, you got kleptomnesia. And I'm like, what's kleptomnesia? And you're like, well, it's people who have ideas they get from other people and they make them their own.
Yeah,
I was like, hey, that's me. And that's what's been funny about reading these books. I was like, oh, I didn't make that up. That was Zig Ziglar's book or Alan's idea.
Yeah, exactly.
But once again, at the end of the day, nobody cares where you got the idea. You just got to have an idea.
Yeah, and you got to capitalize on the idea. It's not about coming up with the idea. It's about capitalizing on the idea.
Yeah. Because if you don't execute on the idea, what's the point of even having it?
Exactly. Like it's like Disney coming up with all these ideas and not building Disneyland. Like what's the point of that?
It would have been a wasted idea.
Terribly wasted, in my opinion. Wow. Sweet. Well, you want to close this out?
I do.
Sweet.
I do. Leaders are readers, and if you're not reading, you're not leading.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode. Check us out on Instagram at Business by the Books. That's the name of our podcast.
Yeah, we better not forget that.
Yeah, we better not forget that. And then also, we do have an email, and so that is businessbythebooks@gmail.com. So that's also super simple. And then we're still working on the website, but it is businessbythebooks.com. So everything is just Business by the Books.
All you got to remember.
Yeah, if you look that up, you'll find us. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will talk to you guys in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.